On April 21, 2025, the Vatican bells ring and instantly the world frees. Pope Francis is dead, but while millions mourn publicly far from Rome's Grand Basilica, a secret heartbreak unfolds quietly inside a tiny house in Buenos Aires. Maria Elena Bergoglio, Pope Francis's only surviving sibling, sits alone clutching her rosary for years. She stayed hidden from the spotlight, never speaking, never stepping forward until now. But why did Maria Elena secretly pray her brother wouldn't become Pope, and why is she breaking her silence on lie after his death? He didn't leave us with riches, Maria whispers, tearfully revealing something that shocks everyone. Pope Francis's legacy isn't gold or hidden Vatican accounts. Instead, it's a fortune hidden in private letters, painful sacrifices and heartbreaking moments the public never saw. How did this quiet boy from a poor Argentina family, a boy who once swept floors and rode buses, become one of the most powerful yet controversial popes ever? And what shocking scandals did Pope Francis confront behind Vatican walls? The answers will leave you speechless. Jorge Mario Bergoglio was born on December 17, 1936, in Buenos Aires, Argentina. He was the first of 5 children in an immigrant family from Italy, and if you think the future pope grew up wealthy or privileged, think again. Maria Elena describes their childhood clearly. We were poor, but we were poor with dignity. Their father Mario earned a modest living as an accountant for the railways. Money was always tight. At just 13 years old, George already took odd jobs. He swept floors in a hosiery factory and ran tests in a chemistry lab. Early on, he learned the real value of hard work, sacrifice, and simplicity. Life in the Bergoglio home wasn't easy, but love and faith filled every corner. Each evening, their father gathered the family together to pray the rosary, teaching his children compassion, humility, and care for others. Those nightly prayers in their modest Beria home deeply shaped the boy who would someday become Pope Francis. When George decided to enter the seminary and become a Jesuit priest, he made a promise that defined the rest of his life: a vow of poverty. Now, this didn't mean living in misery, but it did mean Jorge would never own anything personally. Whatever he had, he would willingly give up to serve the mission of Christ. This vow was George's entire way of life as a priest and later Archbishop of Buenos Aires. Bergoglio rejected luxuries at every turn. Instead of moving into the Grand Archbishop's mansion, George chose a small, simple apartment. He cooked his own meals, washed his own dishes, and traveled by public transportation. On any given morning, you could spot Cardinal Bergoglio on the city busy subway, quietly praying or talking with ordinary people headed to work or home from exhausting night shifts. Because Jorge spent so much time with poorest neighborhoods in Argentina, locals began calling him the slum papelong before the wider world even knew who he was. His deep humility and authentic care for ordinary people made him stand out, earning him respect across Buenos Aires. Then came the moment no one saw coming. In March 2013, Cardinal Jorge Bergoglio suddenly found himself at the center of the world. The cardinal selected him as the first ever pope from Latin America, shocking everyone, including himself. But the moment Jorge became Pope Francis, he made one thing perfectly clear: he wasn't interested in luxury or grandeur. Instead of moving into the massive and opulent papal apartments inside the Apostolic Palace, Francis chose a small two-room suite at Casa Santa Marta, a humble Vatican guest house. Rather than dining alone with fancy table settings, he preferred sitting down with regular visiting priests and Vatican staff members. Even in appearance, Pope Francis refused the typical papal extravagance. He kept the same simple iron cross from his days as bishop, declining the traditional gold one previous popes wore. He famously refused the lavish red papal cape, joking to an aide, "Carnival time I sever," showing clearly that he wasn't interested in regal attire. Pope Francis continued practicing humility even in transportations of fancy limousines. He chose practical, modest cars like a Ford Focus or a simple blue Ford Fiesta around Vatican City. On his historic 2015 visit to the United States, millions watched astonished as the Pope rode through the streets of Washington, D.C., not in a luxury vehicle but squeezed into a tiny Fiat 500L, flanked by giant black security space bank directly to priests and nuns. About humility, Pope Francis didn't hesitate to criticize extravagance. "It hurts me when I see priests or nuns driving the latest model cars," he said firmly. "Sure, a car might be necessary, but please choose a simple one and you're tempted to buy fancy things. Think instead of how many children around the world die of hunger every single day." Pope Francis didn't just preach about poverty, he actively lived it every day. He carried his own luggage in international trips, refusing private eats or luxury comforts unless security required them. These small but powerful actions showed millions worldwide that Francis wasn't just a pope, he was a genuine servant of people dedicated to simplicity and humility. But Francis' humility wasn't just personal preference, it reflected his vision for the entire Catholic Church. Early in his papacy, famously, Francis wanted church leaders to move away from wealth and lavish lifestyles, focusing instead on charity, compassion, and genuine service. One clear example came early when friends and family back home in Argentina wanted to fly to Rome for his inauguration. Pope Francis gently told them no. Maria Elena later explained, "My brother asked us to save our money and give it to the poor instead, so we listened and we stayed home." Right from start, Pope Francis made his priorities crystal clear. Caring for the poor mattered more to him than personal comfort or extravagant ceremony. But as Pope Francis dedicates his life to simplicity, something surprising emerges behind all those humble choices: the modest apartments, small cars, and personal sacrifices. The Vatican itself sits on an incredible mountain of hidden wealth. Suddenly, this humble pope becomes the caretaker of billions of dollars worth of priceless art, historic properties, and financial investments. But how exactly does someone who vows poverty handle managing an empire of riches and actually controls all these treasures? When he's gone, first you need to understand just how massive the Vatican's wealth really is. The Catholic Church has existed for almost 2,000 years, and in that time it has collected treasures beyond belief: art, relics, buildings, and donations from kings, queens, billionaires, and regular faithful across the globe. Look no further than St. Peter's Basilica itself. You've probably seen pictures: the towering dome designed by Michelangelo, stunning columns carved by Bernini, masterpiece worth billions. Today, just one artwork, the Sistine Chapel ceiling, is literally priceless, meaning no amount of money could buy it. Yet none of these treasures actually belong to the Pope personality, belong to the Church history and humanity. Francis is just their temporary guardian, but the Church's wealth isn't only about ancient art and breathtaking guitars. Did the Vatican quietly manages a gigantic portfolio of real estate and investments spread across the world. In 2021, the Vatican surprised everyone, biffingly revealing its real estate holdings, and the numbers are jaw-dropping. The Church owns over 5,000 properties globally. Exactly 4,051 properties in Italy alone, many in prime locations across Rome, and another 1,120 properties scattered around the globe. And this doesn't even count embassy buildings or the residences of papal ambassadors. If you think the Vatican uses these properties to rake in profits, you'd only be partly right. Sure, a small fraction, about 14%, is rented out at market prices, generating steady income, but the overwhelming majority serves the Church's mission directly as school, churches, hospitals, and housing for religious workers, all rented at very low or even symbolic prices. If the Vatican decided to chase profits, its real estate alone could bring in hundreds of millions. Instead, much of this wealth remains quietly dedicated to charity, education, and faith. Then there's the famous Vatican Bank, officially known as the Institute for the Works of Religion. It doesn't work like your regular bank. You can't just open a checking account here unless you work directly for the Church. Instead, the Vatican Bank handles billions of euros on behalf of dioceses, religious orders, and Catholic charities worldwide. By 2021, the bank was managing around 5 billion, that's about 5.6 billion in assets, and yes, it earns profit like the 32 million it reported making in 2022 alone from wise investments. But again, none of this money belongs to Pope Francis personally. It's all meant to support global church missions and charitable efforts. The Vatican Bank itself holds net assets of around $720 million, a solid cushion to ensure financial stability. Now here's the tricky part: when Pope Francis took office back in 2013, Vatican finances weren't just complicated, they were messy and scandal redundancies of shady dealings, accusations of money laundering, and hidden accounts haunted the Church. Francis wasn't having it. Determined to clean house, he immediately hired outside financial experts and established a Secretariat for the Economy in 2014, led by Cardinal Jorge Pell. Their job: bring a very thin to the open and make the Vatican accountable. What Cardinal Pell found shocked even Vatican insiders. He revealed hundreds of millions of euros stashed away, hidden in secret departmental accounts, completely official records. Pell openly told the press, "We discovered some hundreds of millions of euros tucked away that didn't appear on balance sheets." Suddenly, the Vatican looked richer not because of smart management but because funds had been hidden away for years. Media quickly called this revelation the Vatican's hidden fortune, but transparency meant accountability. Pope Francis wasn't scared to confront powerful people directly involved in corruption. The most explosive example, the infamous London real estate scandal back in 2013. The Vatican Secretariat of State invested roughly $200 million into a luxurious property in London. Funds partly meant for charity. The deal quickly went south, riddled with suspected kickbacks, fraud, and misuse of church funds. By 2020, Pope Francis shocked the Catholic world by ordering a sweeping investigation and trial inside the Vatican itself. Even more astonishingly, one of the church's most powerful figures, Cardinal Giovanni Angelo Beattu, once a trusted advisor, faced criminal charges in what journalists called the Vatican's trial of the century. The message Francis sent was loud and clear: nobody is above accountability, no matter how powerful. In early 2025, just months before Pope Francis's death, the trial reached a dramatic conclusion. Cardinal Beattu was found guilty of financial misconduct and sentenced to over 5 years in prison. This conviction was a sign that Francis' reforms would continue echoing through the Vatican long after he was gone. Yet despite all these riches and dramatic scandals, Pope Francis always insisted that the real wealth of the church wasn't measured in euros, properties, or priceless art. Instead, he constantly redirected church funds toward charity. This wild example: in late 2017, Pope Francis received a lavish gift, a sparkling white Lamborghini Huracan worth over $200,000. Did he keep it? Not a chance. Has in the car's hood and immediately locked it off, donating every penny to charities helping rebuild war-torn communities in Iraq and rescuing victims of human trafficking under Francis' 7th papal almoner. Basically, the Vatican's charity office became more active, providing meals and installing showers for homeless people right next to St. Peter's Square. Every chance Francis got, he turned wealth into real-world help. Still, there's no denying Francis had access to immense financial resource. Each year, the Holy See managed a budget of roughly $330 million for day-to-day Vatican operations, plus an additional budget for Vatican City State itself. Think museums, security, and maintenance. Some years, like 2018, saw budget deficits as big as €7 million, forcing Francis to order tough cost-cutting. By March 2021, the Vatican faced another financial crunch from the pandemic. Francis' response: he ordered an unprecedented 10-pay cut for all cardinals and smaller cuts for Vatican staff. It was a powerful signal that even the highest-ranking church leaders had to sacrifice to protect ordinary workers and essential charitable programs. So this paints a complex picture: an institution worth billions of dollars filled with priceless masterpieces, impressive real estate, and powerful investments, yet led by one man, deeply uncomfortable with luxury. This strange contrast begs a critical question everyone now asks following Pope Francis's death: what exactly happens to this wealth he oversaw? And more specifically, what about Pope Francis' personal fortune? Does it even exist? Because despite leading this global empire, Pope Francis shockingly never took a single dollar in salary, not once. And tradition provides popes housing, meals, and travel, making salary sound easy, but Francis specifically erected an optional monthly stipend reportedly worth around $32,000 intended for personal use or charity. He abolished papal salary centrally. So does this mean Francis died penniless? Not exactly. Some sources claim had a personal net worth of around $16 million, but what does this even mean? And does it represent cash stacks hidden somewhere in the Vatican vaults, or is it something more complicated: royalties from books, private donations given for charitable causes, and funds available for his discretion as Pope? The truth sits somewhere in the middle. Francis controlled assets because of his position, not personal greed. Anything he received royalties from best-selling books like Laudato Si, he redirected to charity or church programs. Still, other reports claim he died virtually penniless, holding personal assets worth barely $100,000. Reality likely falls between these extremes. Francis had resources, yes, but owned almost nothing personally. As a Jesuit who long ago vowed poverty, accumulating personal wealth was never his goal, and as Pope, any valuable gifts immediately belong to the Vatican, never personally enriching himself. So as Pope Francis passes, one huge question remains: with all these complexities, who actually enriches his legacy? Unlike billionaires, kings, or celebrities, a Pope doesn't have a typical heir. Catholic Priests including popes never marry or have a children, so there's no simple legal successor to step in and take over his possessions or assets. Instead, what matters most is the spiritual legacy he leaves behind, the way he changed lives and reshaped the Church. But Pope Francis does have family. Maria Elena, his sister, along with several nieces and nephews in Argentina, could understandably expect some special mementos or meandering Vaticans from his remarkable life. So what exactly does Pope Francis leave behind to his loved ones after the funeral mass at St. Peter's Square, attended by hundreds of thousands, including heads of state, religious leaders, and ordinary believers? The Vatican reveals the contents of his last will, but if you expect gold, money, or valuable artifacts, you'll be surprised. In classic Francis fashion, the will is extremely simple. He starts by expressing gratitude to God, humbly asking forgiveness for any mistakes he might have made during his lifetime. Then he carefully distributes just a handful of personal items, nothing fancy, nothing valuable in monetary terms. According to Italian media leaks, Pope Francis decides to leave his personal library, his beloved collection of books and writings, to the Vatican archives. These writings hold immense historical value, documenting Francis's thoughts, beliefs, and spiritual reflections. He specifically requests that his personal letters and correspondence be handled discreetly by his longtime secretary. Some letters might even be destroyed to keep private conversations private forever. But what does he leave to Maria Elena and the rest of his family back in Argentina? Money, properties, valuable jewelry, or cars? No, Pope Francis leaves something far deeper, something that makes his family break down in tears of gratitude and remembrance. He leaves them all the letters he wrote to them over decades, their personal conversations and were birthday notes, Christmas greetings, encouragements, and prayers. And along with these precious letters, Pope Francis writes a heartfelt request for his family: pray and do good for others the very same way he always tried to live his own life. One particular emotion gift stands out. Pope Francis leaves the family's old Bible, the same worn, delicate Bible filled with handwritten notes and prayers scribbled by their late mother Regina and their grandmother Rosa. It's the exact Bible that Rosa used to teach Jorge and Maria Elena to pray when they were little kids growing up in Argentina. A family Bible filled with personal memories, prayers, and deep family love. No amount of money can measure the worth of something like this. Maria Elena calls it priceless, saying it connects her directly with their beloved past and the family they grew up with. As expected, Pope Francis doesn't leave and a large sum of money or material wealth to Maria Elena or any other relative, and Maria Elena, now 77 years old, doesn't mind that at all. In a heartfelt interview a few days after the funeral, her voice trembles as she tells reporters the real fortune her brother left behind. He didn't leave us riches, she says, again he's brimming with tears. He left us faith, love, memories, things we treasure more than any amount of gold. Maria Elena and her family cried deeply, not because they feel bitter or disappointed, but out of pure admiration for a brother who lived exactly as he preached in a world constantly chasing wealth. Jorge, her beloved Lido, as she fondly calls him, showed everyone that true riches are found in humility, service, and unconditional love. We were blessed to share him with the world. Maria Elena whispers, her voice catching, but it cost us dearly. We missed him every single day. One nephew, Mario Bergoglio, travels to Rome for the funeral. Quidla represent the Bergoglio family, carries with him an old family photo showing Jorge and their siblings' parents Sandra in Spain. When reporters ask Mario what Pope Francis's death means to their family, his answer moves millions. For us was always Uncle Jorge first and Pope Francis second. We don't think about any inheritance at all. We only think they's finally reunited with our grandparents, our parents, and his siblings up in heaven. This simple, powerful statement highlights just how fully Pope Francis gave himself to the church. His family literally gave him up to the world, to the service of millions, and now at the end of his life, all they receive back are memories, lessons, and the profound comfort of knowing Jorge touched the entire world. Meanwhile, inside the Vatican, a formal centuries-old process immediately kicks in. Cardinal Kevin Frol the Camello carefully seals off Pope Francis's rooms at Casa Santa Marta. Traditionally, popes lived in the ornitepopal apartments, but since Francis famously chose simple quarters, his modest rooms are sealed instead. Next, an official inventory of his belongings is taken, but no vast treasures are found, just humble personal items like a small statue of Our Lady he kept by his bedside, simple clothes, rosaries, and a Few photographs. All these possessions are eventually archived, preserved, or displayed by the church for history's sake, not handed down to relatives. This procedure isn't new. Back when St. John Paul II died in 2005, his personal notes were famously burned, as instructed by his will. Similarly, Pope Francis leaves almost nothing material behind, like popes before him. Francis genuinely follows that biblical advice, leave nothing on earth. So if Pope Francis didn't leave behind huge sums of money or luxurious properties, what exactly is his real fortune? This is where the story finally comes full circle back to Maria Elena's powerful words. The real wealth Pope Francis leaves behind can't be counted in dollars, euros, or gold coins. Instead, it lives in the hearts and souls of millions of people inspired by his example, people whose lives he changed forever.